A very, very quick, brief outline of Unitarian Universalist history. This is essential to understanding where we are today. In the beginning, we were Christians, heretics, but Christians. And then the Transcendentalists came along, and they said, we're going to redefine Christianity as listening to the voice of God within. And therefore, it transcends traditional historic Christianity. And so this took form in Unitarianism and became, first of all, a force that almost split the denomination, and then ultimately became the majority accepted view. After that, in the 20th century, came ideas like the social gospel, where the words of Jesus were reinterpreted to mean salvation referred to here on earth. It referred to social justice. It referred to standing against oppression. And then humanism took hold, putting people first. God was not totally discarded, but our focus was on humanity. It was on taking care of each other. And humanism could have been secular humanism or religious humanism, but the focus was on people. And finally, pluralism. The idea that there are many paths, all equally valuable, and we can come together while being on these different paths and share something meaningful together in community. And that's where we are today. But the path to how we got here is also important to remember. And as we go through the talk today, I'll be touching on some of these ideas. Now today, if you were to go to Skinner House Bookstore online and check out their selection, you will find amongst them 3 books. Christian Voices in Unitarian Universalism, Jewish Voices in Unitarian Universalism, and Buddhist Voices in Unitarian Universalism. And I don't know if they have some other ones in the works, perhaps Pagan Voices or Humanist Voices. All would be appropriate. I actually have one here. This is the Buddhist Voices. I've read this one. I haven't read the other ones. But just think about how unusual it is to even have these titles as part of a selection of books peculiar to a particular religion or denomination. Here are some of the blurbs from these books. Listen for some key words as we go through it. 15 personal stories from laity and clergy who understand Christianity as part of their relationship with God and Jesus, and to contemporary Unitarian Universalism. These women and men arrive at their liberal Christian faith by several different paths, an intimate look at what it means to be a Unitarian Universalist Christian. The next one. This book brings together for the first time the voices of UUs who have become Buddhist while not sacrificing their identity, and Buddhists who have found in Unitarian Universalism a spiritual home where they can sustain a practice, enjoying in an activist religious community that accepts and encourages who they are. And finally, in a fresh collection of thoughtful essays, 20 writers explore the blessings and challenges of Jewish Unitarian Universalist identity and community. Essayists include born Jews who came to Unitarian Universalism and Unitarian Universalists who adopted Judaism as a spiritual path, and Unitarian Universalists who have encountered Judaism in diverse ways. Why do we have these sorts of books? After all, you would certainly not expect to find, should you be browsing the Southern Baptist bookstore online, something like Buddhist Voices in the Southern Baptist Convention. Would we? Now, that's an assumption I made without doing any research, so then I thought I should do the research. So I went to Amazon, source of all books in the known universe, and searched. And there actually something did come up. 3 books. Just Politics, a Guide for Christian Engagement, Primetime Religion, an Encyclopedia of Religious Broadcasting, and Congregations in Conflict, The Battle Over Homosexuality. That's what I got when I searched for Buddhist voices in the Southern Baptist Convention. So clearly the key words triggered something, but not really what I was looking for. I also did a search for Jewish voices in Catholicism. That brought up nothing. Jewish voices in Lutheranism or Jewish voices in Presbyterianism. Nothing under any of those. So you get the idea. These are really unusual books, if you think about it. Why do we have these hybrid books? What does it mean to be a religion in which all other religions are acknowledged as important? And is this diversity a blessing or a curse? Is our greatest strength also our greatest weakness? We actually talked about this a little bit on a Wednesday night, and I thought, let's explore that a little deeper. We're going to start by looking at our principles and sources. We talk about our principles all the time. We rarely talk about our sources. If you pull your hymn books out, you can follow along. Right in the very front, probably 4 or 5 pages in, you go past the preface, and it says Singing the Living Tradition. And right on the back of that, there's our covenant as Unitarian Universalist congregations. And these principles and sources are not just something that stand alone. They are part of a covenant of our congregations, an agreement made at assemblies, general assemblies, by vote of the congregations that we agree to function this way. This is not a creed. It is not a statement of faith that you personally have to subscribe to. It is part of a covenant, an agreement that this is how the congregations will function. No one ever asks you, if you come up and sign your name in the book and want to become a member, to swear that you will uphold the principles or believe in the sources. So that's the distinction. And the wording begins with the words, "We, member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote." Notice that the word believe is not in there. We affirm and promote as congregations. And then there are the principles. The inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. Now, most of us are fairly familiar, at least, with those principles. Less well known, I suspect, but equally, in my humble opinion, far more important for today's discussion is what comes next, the sources of the living tradition. The living tradition we share, and that means we as Unitarian Universalists, draws from many sources. Direct experience of that transcending mystery and wonder affirmed in all cultures, which moves us to a renewal of the spirit and an openness to the forces which create and uphold life. You could consider that our acknowledgement of transcendentalism. Words and deeds of prophetic women and men, which challenge us to confront powers and structures of evil with justice, compassion, and the transforming power of love. There's our acknowledgement of the social gospel, of standing for justice, of social activism. Wisdom from the world's religions, which inspire us in our ethical and spiritual life. We acknowledge value in the world's religions, not just specific religions. And then we make a particular nod to our history, because we have come up from Christianity. Jewish and Christian teachings which call us to respond to God's love by loving our neighbors as ourselves. Humanist teachings which counsel us to heed the guidance of reason and results of science and warn us against the idolatries of mind and spirit. And finally, spiritual teachings of earth-centered traditions which celebrate the sacred circle of life and instruct us to live in harmony with the rhythms of nature. We are acknowledging as Unitarian Universalists that all of these sources are valuable. We are not excluding any. So let that settle in. We as a religion have said we acknowledge the value of all religions. We covenant and affirm this statement that these things are valuable. They have made us who we are today as Unitarian Universalists. That's why those are our sources. Now, as far as a statement of theology, ethics, or beliefs go, these are our ultimate sources. In the principles, we say that we are going to affirm and promote things that most religions do claim to uphold. If you were to just lay those principles out for someone from any particular religion, odds are they would accept most of them. They might not go for the democratic process one, because some churches are ruled top down and democracy is not a part of their structure as far as how they run a church. But the other things, probably, for the most part, they'd say, yeah, we believe that. It's not terribly unique in the world of religions. They may creatively have to redefine some of the words, but most people aren't going to say, oh, we reject those principles. Most religions would not do that. Turning to the sources, we see that the tradition we share draws from direct human experience, from all the world's religions, from the earth-centered traditions, and the guidance of reason and science. That's a pretty comprehensive list of sources if you think about it. In essence, we're saying we draw from all of human experience. It is, to say the very least, broad. So we are, in true fairness and accuracy, a big tent religion. Big tent meaning we welcome a wide variety of people and beliefs. We welcome all who, in a spirit of respect, are willing to enter and partake in the exchange of ideas that is the center of our discussion circle. We welcome those who are trying to seek truth and meaning in their lives and willing to allow others to do that freely without trying to convert or coerce, but rather to say, let me hear about your journey. Maybe I'll learn something from you. And there are people, of course, who are uncomfortable with calling Unitarian Universalism a religion. There are Unitarian Universalist ministers who wrestle with that, never mind the people in the congregations. But I want to point out a definition that I discovered because, as often happens with an eerie reoccurrence in my life, as I'm working on a sermon, things just sort of fall into my lap. And I had two happen this week. This week, as I was working, the first one, I was listening to a podcast, and I heard a man named Sir Lloyd Gearing. He's a theologian and a Presbyterian minister from New Zealand, described by the BBC as the last living heretic. He actually underwent a trial for heresy in New Zealand for trying to undermine the religion because he dared say things like the resurrection should be viewed symbolically and not literally. He was acquitted, however, and is still technically a minister as well as a professor. He, in turn, loves to quote a scholar of religions named Carlo della Casa. And this is the definition I want you to take out of here today that I think almost anyone could be comfortable with. Religion is a total mode of the interpreting and living of life. Religion is the total mode you give of totality of yourself to interpreting and living your life. In other words, you are mindful of what you're doing. You're trying to make sense of the world, and you're trying to live your life the best way you can. And if this is important to you, if this is important to us as a community, we are a religion. And I think that's absolutely dead on. I think it encompasses this broadness that our sources give us. And I think it's very accurate to call ourselves a religion. And I hope that all can be comfortable with that if you've wrestled with that word. It may not be the way your neighbor uses it down the street. It's certainly not the way they use it in many of the churches here. But, as Sir Lloyd Gearing likes to say, if you don't use this sort of definition for religion, religion will eventually become obsolete. And the old style religion, the old style definition simply don't apply today. That's his opinion. I like the definition. So we are trying to figure out from a large variety of sources and inputs how is the best way to live and to make sense of our existence. And therefore we are a religion that is broad in scope, embracing all these inputs, all the inputs of humankind, be they philosophies or religions, or simply science. We take all these inputs and try to find meaning in the midst of the incredible diversity that is this world. It encourages us to listen to others who think and behave differently, in hopes that our search will be enhanced and strengthened. So far, so good. I could stop right now and we would all leave here very happy. We'd say, that was uplifting. That's a great idea for religion. We really do uphold this diversity within our congregation and pat each other on the back and have our discussion about how great it is to be diverse. But the title of the sermon was, Is Our Greatest Strength Also Our Greatest Weakness? And I want to talk about the challenges that come out of diversity, because there are challenges. And this is the second thing that fell into my lap today, for the sermon today. It was a blog posting I read, and it comes from a man named John Beckett, who writes a blog called Under the Ancient Oaks. He is a UU pagan, and on February 1st, in a post entitled What a Polytheist Learned from Unitarian Universalists, he writes, the intra-pagan fighting between polytheists and humanist atheists seems to be picking up again. There have been atheo-pagans, and I assume I've never heard that term before. It's got to be an atheist pagan, someone who doesn't actually believe in the pagan deities but still follows the pagan practices. There have been atheo-pagans who've been highly critical of what they see as unreason. And while the ones I read did not completely dismiss the value of religious experience, they insist there's only one proper explanation for it. Not surprisingly, there have been polytheist responses attacking the presumed supremacy of non-theism and insisting that the rights of polytheists be respected. Now, I will pause here to note that I know very little about paganism. I don't do a lot of reading, and I'm not involved in the rituals and the practices, so we might get more input during our discussion from people who are. I had never heard of the atheo-pagan, as I mentioned, but there is a humanist-theist tension going on in the pagan world, apparently, that's similar to what has often occurred within Unitarian Universalism. But back to Mr. Beckett in a few more paragraphs. He says, these arguments are unfortunate, even if they are perhaps inevitable. While they help various pagan subgroups more precisely define and differentiate between themselves, they do so in a way that breeds bad feelings and discourages cooperation and common interests. He then describes his experience within a UU congregation. When I walk into a Sunday service, I'm walking into another big tent. There are pagans, Christians, Buddhists, atheists, and a lot of people who are hard to classify and damned proud of it. We believe different things about the nature of the universe, whether there are gods, and if so, what they're like, and whether humans and other animals have souls, and if so, whether they survive death or not, and if so, in what form. We don't gloss over our differences, well, at least most of us don't, but we don't feel the need to convert each other. And more importantly, we see no reason for these differences on unprovable matters to interfere with our common interests in building a more just and compassionate world here and now. So I encourage our most ardent atheists and our most pious polytheists to talk about what they do, what they believe, and why. I encourage them to explain their assumptions, their experiences, and their interpretations, but I encourage them to do so in ways that are honest and respectful, and perhaps even friendly. It's a good idea this polytheist learned from Unitarian Universalists. So this passage illustrates one of the problems with diversity, the tendency for one group to claim that they know better than the others. And this can lead to infighting, which is an all too human tendency, and since we are a congregation made up of humans, we are certainly eligible to fall into that category of being presumptuous, of being arrogant, of knowing better than everyone else. And we must constantly guard against it. Another problem is what I will call the problem of depth, spiritual depth, if you will. As UUs seek deeper meaning in their lives, they tend to narrow their search to one of these many sources that we acknowledge in our covenant. There's nothing wrong with that. They're going to find something that resonates with them, something that really lifts them, lifts their spirit, their soul, whatever terminology you want to use, something that helps them to live better, helps them to interpret this life in that new definition of religion that I talked about. We interpret it. We're trying to make sense of it. And for some people, they focus on Christianity or Buddhism or paganism or humanism or any of the other religious paths that are out there. And then we have groups that are formed, acknowledged by the UUA, and we have groups for UU Christians, UU Buddhists, UU Pagans, UU Humanists. And then we publish books about it, like the one I held up. We fully acknowledge and accept that there are voices from particular paths within Unitarian Universalism, and we wrestle with that tension. And the danger, if you want to call it that, is some may lose interest in Unitarian Universalism and focus solely on one of these paths. And in fact, in this particular book, there were a couple of people who were Unitarian Universalists and technically still call themselves one, but they no longer go to a UU congregation. And they've pretty much given themselves over to Buddhism, but they acknowledge that they found it within a UU congregation. They still have a fondness in their heart for it, but they have left. And it took a little courage to put that in a book, by the way, I might add, to be honest and upfront about that aspect of this diversity. Sometimes people are simply going to leave because the diversity is not enough for them. So, let's suppose you are a Christian UU. Why not just go to a Christian church? If you're a Buddhist UU, why not just go to a Buddhist temple or a Zen center? If you're Jewish, why not go to a synagogue? Why go to this UU congregation and still have this identity that's so important to you? What is it besides diversity that we offer that's unique as a UU congregation? I think the answer is simple. We provide a unique congregational setting, mutual support amongst the members and the attenders, a community that might not be available elsewhere. It is not unusual, for instance, for Buddhist families to go to UU congregations because Buddhist groups are notorious for having nothing to offer for the children. And they want to go somewhere for their children to learn about religion, to be able to socialize with other children in a setting where the spirit is discussed. And oftentimes they're told, go try a UU congregation because they will accept you as a Buddhist. They will not try to get you to stop being a Buddhist. In fact, they'll be excited to have a Buddhist among them and want to learn from you. And this has happened time and time and time again. And it's not just the Buddhists, but again, I was reading stories about it in this book. This happens with other people too. I went to seminary with someone who was a UU Jew. She found incredible spiritual strength in the Jewish tradition, but is solely sold out as being a Unitarian Universalist and is indeed a minister now. She got her pulpit, but still loves the Jewish tradition and teachings that she grew up in and has not abandoned them either. Many pagan groups are small. They don't have a lot of funding. They don't have buildings of their own, if they even wanted buildings of their own. But they find that they can go to a Unitarian Universalist congregation and be accepted as pagans. They can have their rituals and their practices, and they can meet in separate groups to discuss things particular to their spiritual path, and they're not looked down upon, and they're not coerced and told, well, you don't really want to follow that path, why don't you come over here and do it this way? That's what Unitarian Universalism offers. It's not just a sanctuary, although many of us have fled from some form of oppressive religion or another. It's not just a place to escape to. It's a place that offers support amongst people, and a place that hopefully is encouraging people to practice the different paths that give them meaning. Hopefully. I can't say all congregations do that. I don't have that personal experience, but I've heard a lot of good things. So, why stick with a UU congregation? Numerous reasons, including a desire to interact with people who do not believe the same way you do. They believe differently, and you might be able to learn something from them. And this would apply to the group that would probably be the most problematic, would be the UU Christians. There are so many Christian churches. You could certainly go to one, even a liberal Christian church, and why wouldn't you do that? Why would you stay here with all the non-Christians, still call yourself a Christian, still believe that Jesus is the exemplar in your life, if you will, if you don't believe literally that he's the Son of God, than at least someone who you want to model your life on, why would you come here? There are Christians who I firmly believe and know from talking to some that actually find value in these other paths also. Even though Christianity is what's important to them, they do want to learn about other religious paths. And some dare even acknowledge that perhaps there were some inputs into Jesus's teachings that came from Asia. There are numerous books out there that would suggest a connection to Buddhist teachings or Hindu teachings that show up in Jesus's teachings. And so they're not afraid of looking down those other paths too, and they're not going to find that in a Christian church, but they'll find that in a UU church while still maintaining their Christian identity. And this brings us all back to what I talked about at the very beginning. A Christian coming from the Universalist tradition, remember that early Christian heretical tradition that taught that we believe the Bible is God's word, we believe Jesus was a prophet, but we don't believe God, the God of love, is going to burn anyone in hell for all eternity. That makes no sense, but we're still calling ourselves Christians. That sort of mindset today wouldn't find a welcoming place in many Christian churches. Some they would. But then they extend that a little more and say, we can also find value in those other religious paths. And I really want to hear about those other religious paths. And now they're right back to being what Unitarian Universalists were in the old days. And they personally might move through those exact stages that we as a religion move through. Christian heretic to transcendentalist, listening to the voice of God within, finding more value in taking care of people and worrying about their needs and relationships, and becoming a humanist, a social justice activist, and finally welcoming the diversity in their lives that we, as Unitarian Universalists, allegedly and claim and hopefully do welcome in our congregations. Today we are more diverse theologically than ever before. And it is fair to say that if you were able to hop in your time machine and go back to those early great Unitarians and Universalists, Universalists like Hosea Ballou, who's probably considered the preeminent Universalist, and you were to show him our current principles and sources, when he would look down at those sources, he probably wouldn't agree. He probably wouldn't agree. He was a Christian through and through. A heretic, but a Christian. And he probably wouldn't say, I find value in these earth-centered traditions or the world's religions. He would have given Christianity a preeminence. So there's been this evolution. And today we are very diverse indeed. And as each of our members searches for value, meaning in life, they may head down one of these particular paths. It's almost inevitable for anyone who's really serious, really serious isn't a good word, who's really, really searching and spends a lot of time thinking about these things. It's almost inevitable that one of these paths is going to resonate more. Very rare is someone who just finds everything equally valuable. Not to say the other things aren't valuable, but there's just one path that really hits the right notes for you. And that's okay. In fact, that's to be expected. And so, once that happens, our greatest strength does indeed have that potential to be a weakness. Some members may indeed leave wishing to give themselves more seriously to one path, and they may not find value in what we're doing here. I hope that's not the case, but it does happen. We know that. And if it does happen, we shouldn't be sad about it. We shouldn't be disappointed, because we have helped somebody to get to that point. And ultimately, that's what we should care about. Our goal is to create a Sunday service in a community in which the most serious humanists, Christians, Jews, Muslims, Buddhists, pagans, and all other religions and philosophies can come together in love and respect for each other. We must make this time together valuable and worthwhile. People are willing to get up on a Sunday. They're willing to come here and give of their time. Hopefully what we do here does have meaning for all. So I believe that this hybrid or hyphenated Unitarian Universalism will be a permanent fixture of our religion. People will continue to identify as humanist UU or pagan UU or any of the other possibilities. Some may find this unfortunate, but I think this is simply a normal outcome of our evolution. It's a normal outcome of the fact that we acknowledge all these sources in our covenant. So as long as we don't lose sight of the Unitarian Universalist part of our journeys, we're going to do fine, both here and across our association. Love, support, community, friendship, caring, social justice activities, all of these transcend those individual paths and bind us together. At least that should be the goal. So while our diversity has the potential to be a weakness, it will only be one if we are careless and if we lose sight of the things that bind us together. If we work to make sure that our service and discussion focuses on our unities, we need not be worried about the differences, but rather welcome them and celebrate them. And I look forward to hearing your thoughts during our discussion time. Thank you.